I'm James the Blurred, and welcome to my Black Myth Wukong review. And if this helps you out, be sure to sub and turn on your notifications. Black Myth Wukong is a game that defies the expectations of a typical Souls-like. Despite borrowing elements from the genre, the developers at Game Science have made it clear that this is primarily an action RPG. Rather than focusing on punishing difficulties, the game offers a fast-paced experience centered on a sequence of boss battles. Players will often find themselves in the midst of one challenging encounter after another, with less emphasis on exploration or traditional level design, while the combat and bosses are the main draw. The moments between these fights can feel slow and somewhat lacking in excitement. At the heart of the game is the inspiration, the classic Chinese novel Journey to the West. While many games and adaptations have drawn from this story, Black Myth Wukong offers a unique twist by setting itself after the events of the original narrative. This departure allows the game to explore new stories within a familiar framework, giving players the opportunity to engage with well-known characters and settings while also encountering unexpected twists and mysteries. From the outset, it's important to understand that Black Myth Wukong is not a traditional Souls-like. Despite its appearance, which shares many aesthetics and mechanical similarities with games in that genre, such as its dark atmosphere, challenging boss encounters, and a checkpoint system, the game avoids the more punishing aspects of the genre. While Souls-like games typically center on brutal difficulty and a sense of progression through failure, Black Myth Wukong places a greater emphasis on combat fluidity and boss encounters, setting itself apart with a faster, more dynamic pacing. Rather than a sprawling, interconnected world filled with challenging mobs and difficult navigation, Black Myth Wukong is structured more like a boss rush. Players will often find themselves going from one intense boss fight to another with little downtime in between. For those who love high-stakes combat, this approach is exciting and refreshing, but it also means that the game's pace can feel uneven. In between these thrilling fights, the game occasionally falls into a lull, where exploration or minor combat sequences feel sparse and less engaging by comparison. However, one significant drawback to this streamlined structure is the absence of a map. For a game that occasionally branches out into wider areas, the lack of a map often leads to confusion, particularly when trying to find the next objective or retrace steps. Without an in-game navigation aids, players might find themselves wandering aimlessly, especially in more open levels. This adds unnecessary frustration, which could easily have been mitigated by a simple map or directional cues. Further compounds this frustration is the frequent use of invisible walls throughout the game. While the game offers beautiful environments to explore, the invisible barriers can disrupt immersion and limit the sense of exploration. These walls often appear in places where the player might expect to traverse, making the world feel more restrictive and less organic than it appears. Journey to the West is a Chinese novel that has left a global mark on culture. Written in the 16th century during the Ming Dynasty, the story of the Monkey King Sun Wukong and his companions has inspired countless adaptations across various media. From films to manga to video games, Black Myth Wukong places itself squarely within this lineage, drawing heavily from the original text but also taking creative liberties to tell its own story. In Black Myth Wukong, players take on the role of a mute monkey known as the Destined One. This character shares many traits with Sun Wukong, the legendary Monkey King, but the game leaves much about his true identity shrouded in mystery. Is he a reincarnation of Sun Wukong, or perhaps one of his clones? The game teases this question throughout its narrative, leading to a thrilling conclusion that ties together its story in a satisfying way. That said, much of the game's broader narrative can feel difficult to grasp, especially for players unfamiliar with the Journey to the West or Chinese mythology more broadly. While each of the game's 6 chapters presents a relatively self-contained tale dealing with universal human emotions, such as love, hate, and greed, there are frequent references to figures and concepts from Chinese folklore that may fly over the heads of those not steeped in the source material. This creates a bit of a disconnect for those who are drawn in by the gameplay but find the story harder to follow. Nevertheless, there are moments of brilliance in the storytelling, particularly in how the game handles certain reoccurring characters. The headless monk who serenades the player with an enigmatic song is a standout example of how the game intertwines mythological themes with an eerie, mystical atmosphere. The care and attention to detail with which Game Science has approached this adaptation is evident, even if it sometimes feels inaccessible to a broader audience. The standout feature of Black Myth Wukong is undoubtedly its combat system. Players familiar with Sun Wukong's legendary abilities will feel right at home as they wield the iconic Ryu Jinbu Bang, a magical staff capable of shrinking and expanding at will. This weapon is central to the game's combat, offering both versatility and power. Players can execute complex combos with the staff, watching as it grows to pummel enemies before retracting to its original size. In addition to the staff, the player has access to a range of other abilities drawn from Sun Wukong's mythical powers. These include creating clones from a single strand of hair, freezing enemies in place with a simple gesture, and shapeshifting into various forms. These abilities add layers of depth to the combat, allowing players to tailor their approach to different encounters. One of the most interesting mechanics is the game's focus and combo system. Light attacks are used to build up focus points, which can then be spent on heavy attacks that deal significant damage. This creates a rhythm in combat where players must balance offense and defense, building up power through quick strikes before unleashing devastating finishers. It's a rewarding system that encourages players to think strategically about when to go on the offense and when to hold back. Shapeshifting is another key part of combat, allowing players to transform into previously defeated enemies and use their unique movesets. One of the earliest transformations is into the wolf Guangjir, whose flaming glaze offers powerful burn attacks. Each transformation has its own health bar, essentially giving players an extra life in battle. This adds a layer of strategy as players can switch between forms to adapt to different situations, exploiting weaknesses or buying time to heal. The game also features a variety of spells that can be used to turn the tide of battle. Some, like the Immobilize spell, are essential for controlling the flow of combat, freezing enemies in place to give the player a time to strike. Others, like the ability to summon clones, provide distraction and allow for more tactical maneuvers. While these spells operate on cooldowns, they are vital tools for survival, especially in the more challenging boss fights. While Black Myth Wukong offers various builds and abilities for players to experiment with, the armor system itself is rather flat in terms of stats. Players won't find a lot of customization or stat bonuses tied to armor, limiting the impact it has on an overall gameplay. Despite this, the game's strength lies in the variety of abilities and playstyles that emerge from combining spells, transformations, and weapons, allowing for plenty of diversity in combat approaches. If Black Myth Wukong is a boss rush, then its boss fights are the crown jewel of this experience. Each of the game's 6 chapters presents a gallery of bosses or Yagwes drawn from Chinese mythology. These mythological beasts range from a giant black bear to a traditional Chinese dragon, and each one offers a distinct challenge that keeps the combat feeling fresh and exciting. The game's reliance on dodging rather than blocking creates an intense combat rhythm. Players must learn enemy attack patterns, nail the timing on dodges, and find opportunities to attack. The challenge lies not just in reflexes, but in strategy, as certain bosses are immune to some spells or have elemental weaknesses that players can exploit. This encourages experimentation and keeps the combat engaging throughout the game. For Souls-like veterans, some of the boss fights may feel easier than expected, but this doesn't detract from their thrill. Even when a boss is defeated on the first try, the satisfaction of landing the final blow after a carefully executed combo is real. At its most challenging, the game delivers heart-pounding encounters that leave players with a sense of elation when they finally emerge victorious. The variety in boss design is also commendable. From the blood-spattered tiger to the serene battle on a frozen lake, each fight feels visually distinct and mechanically diverse. The settings for these battles are often as impressive as the creatures themselves, whether it's a snow-capped mountain range or a shallow pool of blood, creating an atmosphere that completes the epic scale of the encounters. While the boss fights are a highlight, the sections of the game between these battles are where Black Myth stumbles. The world design is primarily linear, with only a few branching paths that lead to optional bosses or crafting materials. This linearity isn't inherently a problem. For me personally, it's not, but it does limit the sense of exploration that many players expect from action RPG genres. There are moments when the world opens up into more expansive areas, but these are rare. The level design also suffers from the presence of invisible walls and a jump mechanic that feels underutilized. The lack of meaningful exploration makes the downtime between boss fights feel sparse and less engaging. This is compounded by the fact that regular enemies are far and few between, and those that do appear rarely pose much of a challenge, making the non-boss section feel much like your favorite anime arc filler episode. Another issue that doesn't help with the lack of engagement during exploration is the absence of an effective platforming system. While players can jump, the jump mechanic itself feels awkward and underutilized for most of the game. It's not a core mechanic, it's not part of navigation or combat, and serves mostly as a reminder of the game's linear structure. There are no significant puzzles, platforming challenge, or exploration incentives that require clever use of the jump, and this limits the variety of experiences between combat encounters. One area where Black Myth Wukong consistently excels at is its visual presentation. The game's environments, while linear and often restricted, are undeniably, dare I say it, gorgeous. Whether traversing through dense bamboo forests or battling on frozen lakes, the game's attention to environmental detail is impressive. The use of Unreal Engine 5 allows for stunning textures, lighting, and particle effects that bring the mythological world to life. The sun-kissed rocks of mountain paths, the swaying bamboo, and the detailed character models all showcase the potential of next-gen gaming. Character design is another really high point, especially for the bosses. The Yao Gui are rendered with extraordinary detail, their mythological roots coming to life in both form and movement. From a giant bear with striking features to a sinuous dragon twisting through the sky, each creature feels uniquely menacing and visually distinct. These designs are paired with smooth animation work that enhances the fluidity of combat and emphasizes the weight behind each strike, dodge, and spell. In terms of performance, this game ran smoothly, particularly on high-end PCs, where it benefits from impressive frame rates and resolution. The game compiles shaders at the start to prevent stuttering, which is a common issue with Unreal Engine 5, and overall it maintains stable performance throughout. On console, performance remains solid, although there may be occasional dips during more graphical intense moments. The audio design complements its stunning visuals, creating an immersive atmosphere that pulls players into its mythological world. The soundtrack is filled with traditional Chinese instruments, giving it an authentic feel that pays homage to the cultural roots of the story. Whether players are wandering through serene landscapes or locked in fierce combat with a boss, the music adjusts accordingly, heightening the emotional weight of each moment. Sound effects in combat are impactful, with the staff's blows landing with satisfying thuds and magical spells sounding mystical and powerful. The auditory cues for enemy attacks are also well tuned, helping players time their dodges and counterattacks. Meanwhile, the voice acting, though sparse due to the mute protagonist, is strong in delivering the game's mythological narrative. Special mention must be given to the Headless Monk, whose haunting serenades enhance the game's mystical atmosphere. This game is definitely a ride while it lasts, and for players who enjoy uncovering hidden content, its replayability is far from limited. While the game's linear structure and focus on boss rushes may suggest a straightforward experience, there are multiple incentives to dive back in after completing the main story. Players can unlock new weapons, bonus armors, and a secret stance form on subsequent playthroughs, offering fresh combat strategies and challenges. These features provide high replayability for those who enjoy perfecting their builds, experimenting with different abilities, and mastering every aspect of the game. For completionists and combat enthusiasts, these unlockables keep the adventure engaging long after your first completion. Moreover, the absence of multiplayer or co-op modes, common features in game with intense boss combat, limits the social appeal of replaying difficult battles with friends. Once the story is completed and the major bosses are defeated, the game doesn't offer many additional challenges to keep players coming back. This doesn't detract from the quality of the experience, but it does mean that Black Myth feels more like a singular journey rather than a game designed for a bunch of repeat playthroughs. Ultimately, Black Myth Wukong is a game that stands out for its high-octane combat and mythological rich setting, but it also suffers from noticeable shortcomings. Its boss fights are where the game truly shines, offering thrilling and intense battles that reward strategic thinking and quick reflexes. However, outside of these encounters, the game's lack of exploration depth, linear level design, and a flat armor system detract from its potential to be a more well-rounded action RPG. The visual and audio design help elevate the experience, creating an immersive world that is as beautiful as it is dangerous. The mythology behind the story is rich, but without a deep understanding of the journey to the west, some players may find themselves disconnected from the narrative. Despite this, the combat and boss fights alone make Black Myth Wukong a game worth experiencing, especially for those who crave fast-paced, action-packed gameplay. For those of you expecting a Souls-like experience, it's important to adjust your expectation. While it borrows some elements from that genre, this game is more of an action RPG with a unique twist on Chinese mythology. It offers plenty of memorable moments, but also has a few frustrations along the way. Nevertheless, I promise this is a game that you will enjoy, and it'll be worth celebrating once you've completed. If this review has helped you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on your notifications. Other than that, I'm out. Peace.